Welcome to Searching the Scriptures. Our Bible teacher will be Gunther von Harringa Sr. In this series of studies, we will be focusing on the book of Judges. So without further ado, let's look into God's Word, the Bible.
This is going to be part number 2 of Judges 4, and today's date is April 26, 2017. I'll read verses 1 to 4. Again, this is Judges chapter 4. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of Jehovah, when Ehud was dead. And Jehovah sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. And the children of Israel cried unto Jehovah, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. And Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time. We've begun in Judges 4, and we want to take a closer look at this man, Sisera, who was the captain or the general of the army of Jabin, king of Canaan, as verse 2 stated. The term captain is actually Strong's number 8629, and it's found 421 times in the Old Testament, according to the Blue Letter Bible, and is rendered predominantly as prince, captain, chief, and ruler, as these next verses demonstrate. In Isaiah 9:6, we find this beautiful declaration, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." Here the word "the Prince" is this word 8269. In Judges 4:7, we also find this word repeated, and it actually surfaces throughout the rest of the book of Judges, going from chapter 4 onwards. "And I will draw unto thee," this is Deborah, Judge Deborah speaking to Barak, "and I will draw unto thee to the river Kishon Sisera, the captain of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into thine hand." In Genesis 40, in fact, in verses 2 to 4, 9, 16, and 23, we find the most amount of references to this word in any particular chapter in the Bible. And this also is a historical parable in its own right. "And Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers," it's the word chief, "and against the chief of the bakers," again, chief, "and he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard," here it's of the captain, "into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward." Verse 9, "And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me." Verse 16, "When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. Verse 20, and it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again. And he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. In Exodus 18:21, this word appears as rulers 4 times. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. The root word for 8269, which is SAR, is actually 8323. And 8323 is similar. It's Sarar. And it's found, for example, in Proverbs 8:16. And it's translated as rule, along with Sar, which is rendered as princes. And here God is making a point. He is setting forth a principle that all authority stems from God, ultimately. By me, princes rule, and nobles, even all the judges of the earth. So in this passage, we have both 8269, which is the word we're looking at, and then the root word, which is 8323, translated as rule. Now, if we go down to the last half of verse 2, we find that Sisera dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. The 2 words Harosheth of the Gentiles is curiously only found in this chapter, chapter 4, and it's mentioned 2 other times in verses 13 and 16, besides here in verse, I think I said verse 2, but it's actually, it is in verse 2. No, I take it back. It is in verse 2. So it's verse 2 and then verse 13 and verse 16. And Jehovah sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. And this word Gentiles is the word nations. Harosheth is 2,800, and Gentiles or nations is 1471. Then we read in verse 13, and Sisera gathered together all his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him, from Harosheth of the Gentiles unto the river of Kishon. Verse 16, but Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host, or the army, unto Harosheth of the Gentiles. And all the host of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left. And of course, we're going to look at this a little more closely as we get further into this chapter. But notice the repetition of the phrase 900 chariots of iron, as in verse 3. And the children of Israel cried unto Jehovah, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. These two words, chariots and of iron, also appear in some other citations in the Old Testament. Chariots, by the way, is 7393, and of iron is 1270. We find these two terms together, for example, in Joshua 17, 14 through 18. And it appears in verse 16 and also in verse 18. And the children of Joseph spake unto Joshua, saying, Why hast thou given me but one lot, and one portion to inherit, seeing I am a great people? Forasmuch as Jehovah hath blessed me hitherto. And Joshua answered them, If thou be a great people, then get thee up to the wood country, and cut down for thyself there in the land of the Perizzites and of the giants, if Mount Ephraim be too narrow for thee. And the children of Joseph said, The hill is not enough for us. And all the Canaanites that dwell in the land of the valley have chariots of iron, both they who are of Bethshean and her towns, and they who are of the valley of Jezreel. And Joshua spake unto the house of Joseph, even to Ephraim and to Manasseh, saying, Thou art a great people, and hast great power. Thou shalt not have one lot only, but the mountain shall be thine, for it is a wood, and thou shalt cut it down, and the outgoings of it shall be thine. For thou shalt drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots, and though they be strong. We also saw something similar that was corroborated in our study of Judges chapter 1 in verse 19. And Jehovah was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron. I've mentioned repeatedly that throughout this series we run across this cycle, this main historical theme that we find all throughout the book of Judges, and it's this cycle of rebellion, oppression, deliverance, and rest. And in verse 3 here in chapter 4, we find this very word, oppressed, which is Strong's number 3905, along with its Hebrew modifier, mightily, which is 2394. In English, we would classify it as an adverb, but here in Hebrew, it's actually a noun. And the term oppression is found 19 times and is rendered in the following ways. Oppress 13 times, afflict once, crushed once, fast once, forced once, oppressors once, and once as thrust. And we'll take a look at a few examples of how God utilizes this word. We actually came across this word in Judges 2:18. And it's rendered here as by reason of them that oppressed. And in this passage, God is actually explaining the third stage in this cycle of rebellion, oppression, deliverance, and rest. And here he's really speaking about deliverance. And when Jehovah raised them up judges, then Jehovah was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For it repented Jehovah because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. And we saw that right at the beginning of this chapter with verse 1. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of Jehovah when Ehud was dead. As soon as the judge died, then there was this great tendency to go right back into their sin. And then the cycle, starts all over again. Also, if we go to Psalm 106, verse 42, in this psalm, I'll just read verses 34 to 42, but in verse 42, this word is rendered as also oppressed. And it's really speaking about the time leading up to the judges and during the judges as well. They did not destroy the nations concerning whom Jehovah commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen and learned their works. And they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils, and shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and of their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan. And the land was polluted with blood. Thus were they defiled with their own works, and went a whoring with their own inventions. Therefore was the wrath of Jehovah kindled against his people, insomuch that he abhorred his own inheritance. And he gave them into the hand of the heathen, and they that hated them ruled over them. Their enemies also oppressed them, and they were brought into subjection under their hand. Similarly, we find this word used in connection with Israel's bondage in Egypt in verse 9 of Exodus 3, 6 through 10. And here it's rendered as oppress. And this is where God, in speaking to Moses, lays out his will, his plan for what he wants Moses to do and how he's going to lead or to use Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt and into the promised land eventually. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And Jehovah said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land, and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is come unto me. And I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppress them. Come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. By the way, the word here, oppress, is our word, 3905, and there is a derivative of this word, which is the oppression, which is actually in the same verse and verse 9, and it's identically spelled. And we also understand that the bondage in Egypt was really a picture of mankind's bondage to sin and to slavery. Pharaoh, if you recall, is a great type of Satan. And the bondage, the physical, mental, emotional bondage that the Israelites were involved in and had to put up with day after day after day for hundreds of years, is really a picture of mankind in the kingdom of Satan under the wrath of God. And the deliverance from that has everything to do with God himself and nothing to do with the individuals, the men, women, and children who were there in that historical setting. They could not get out of that bondage. It was completely impossible. And so the only thing they knew how to do was to cry out to God for mercy, which is a picture of the elect crying out to God during the day of salvation, or those who are going to be elect. Similarly, we read of these individuals as widows and orphans and the fatherless, because they were elect, but they might not have been saved for a period of time. And so they are referred to in these terms. But nonetheless, that bondage is a picture of the spiritual bondage that mankind is in, and for which only Christ can deliver them, again, during the day of salvation. And so it really highlights the absolute unique work of Christ, his faith, his work to deliver his people. And that whole episode surrounding the Exodus has everything to do with the fact that God was the one that was orchestrating everything. And we see this over and over again in that account. Now, the term mightily here that is actually modifying this word oppression really pinpoints the tremendous anguish and suffering that they were subjected to. And we're going to see this throughout the book of Judges, as I've mentioned previously, throughout this entire 360-year period of the book of Judges. And Lord willing, in our next study, I want to take a closer look at this term mightily and see how God uses that.
Thank you for joining us today for Searching the Scriptures. Until next time, to God be the glory.